What are the warning signs for people that may have a massive toxic overload of these foods in their body?
With oxalate poisoning, like any other disease, it starts off completely silent. After that's finished smoothie, you feel fine because you have belief that what you just did was fantastic. We call this placebo effect. So you're going to feel great, maybe for a couple of years, but eventually the silence will start to break. It might be kind of late. The end stage sign is a kidney stone. If you've already got urinary tract problems, if you've got nighttime urination, frequent urination, a bladder that can't hold, if you've got burning urine, cloudy urine, interstitial cystitis with bladder pain, the whole musculoskeletal system can get rheumatic in nature. So you start to get achy and swelly, and you lose the strength in your hands. You can get stiffness, muscle spasms, and the crystals start forming in joint spaces, and you end up with gout-like symptoms. Another system would be...
Sally, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. How are you, sister?
Oh, it's a delight. I'm wonderful. I'm so happy to meet you and hang out with your people. It's so fun.
You look amazing. I just want to say that straight up. And you must be doing something right. And I think I've recorded 500 podcasts over the last, I don't know, however many years on health, nutrition, the tools that we have available for us to live a long-term regenerative lifestyle. And I have never, ever done a podcast about oxalates and toxic superfoods. And you would think this would be one of the first ones that I would have done, and it's taken me this long, but everything happens for a reason, as we know. And
this is a hidden topic. It hasn't been in the conversation. It just hasn't.
I'm fascinated. And I'll tell you a little story later on, but first off, I know it's quite repetitive for you, as when people ask me, tell me about your backstory. It's like, okay, here we go. Tell me a little bit or a lot about your backstory and why you're in this position to not only discover this information, but to share it, and why you believe it is so essential for us to know.
Yeah, my life arc forced me into this position. Fate has forced me to do some things I wouldn't have done on my own. Like, sort of be public about my opinions and stick my neck on the line. And we're doing that because there's really serious stuff at stake. I started being a nutrition geek by kindergarten. I was coming home and telling my mom what I learned in school about what we're supposed to eat. And it didn't work out so well for me. I decided in 7th grade I would study nutrition to help people not get sick, because I had this insight, thanks to my science teacher, that what you eat affects the development of chronic disease. And it's basically a lifestyle decision whether you end up getting sick with major diseases that are becoming super prevalent.
That is common sense. You're not allowed to talk about that, Sally. You know that.
I know. The thought police is really having trouble because, where profit lies is not where health is. We have bowed to the mighty dollar in a way that's compromised the bigger picture of well-being for humanity, I fear. And
that's
really warping everything. It's warping science itself. The mercenary attitude in research right now is quite sad, that we have to justify this research because we can develop a drug for this.
Did you understand that from a young age, or were you, and I don't want to use the word ignorant or naive to it, or trusting, but how has that developed for you over your time? And when was the first sort of, I guess, red flag for you that something's a little bit or a lot out of harmony here?
Out of harmony, unfortunately. You can sort of see it in the hypocrisy inside my own profession of public health and nutrition, where you are given endpoints, beliefs, instead of a way to think for yourself, even in college. So I was told at Cornell that there is absolutely no downsides to sugar except dental caries. And the oxalate information in college was a few paragraphs here and there, and it was just about kidney stones. And in public health, we keep adding in more of these hopefully preventative treatments called vaccines, without necessarily doing long-term studies that demonstrate long-term safety or get a sense of how this is influencing human metabolism, human aging, human immune function. So there's a lot of missing pieces. And in your own life, you start tripping on your belief systems. I tripped on the vegetarian thing badly. I tripped on fear of butter and like the things I learned in school, like the most saturated fat is dairy fat and butter is going to kill you. I mean, I came out of school believing this kind of thing, even though the cultures who live on cheese and butter do very well in terms of longevity and health longevity. Because it's not about the number of years, it's about life in your years. And you want to be dropping dead during your marathon run at age 95, not living the last 15 years in an expensive place where you don't do anything all day, you know? So there's a lot of things that just, if you're a logical person like me and you're doing the best you can to eat well, live well, exercise, be a good person, be in touch with trees and nature, and, it is not working out, you just keep blaming yourself for having a lemon of a body.
Yeah. So what did you study then at Cornell?
I studied Cornell. I studied human nutrition because that was the goal since 7th grade, was to get this nutrition degree to learn how to build health and find a way to support that. And then I went on and got my master's in public health, but I had a lot of interruptions and all that. I was having health problems in college. I had to drop out of school for 4 years and had foot surgery because I couldn't walk. I was using crutches. I had to get a bike to get around campus. I needed driving privileges on Cornell's campus. That never happens. I had to have that. I was on painkillers. For 5 years, they had me on enormous amounts of ibuprofen. And to go to the grocery store, the state fair, or to family vacation, I was in a wheelchair. And I continued to have foot problems until I was 49, when I figured out that oxalates were a real issue for me, and that I needed to get off certain plant foods that I've been relying on. For me, principally, it was sweet potatoes and Swiss chard, in order to deal with this lifetime of arthritis, which was now coming back because I had added kiwi to my diet, and now I'm getting arthritis again. And the weird thing is my foot problems that had been bothering me for 30 years completely disappeared by getting rid of like 3 vegetables.
So take me back then to healthy nutrition, where you were studying. And you mentioned vegetarianism in there as well. And I know everybody has very different beliefs, and I went down the vegetarian vegan path at the age of 19 after attending a Tony Robbins workshop here at Australia for 3 days and reading Fit for Life by the Diamonds. And I became a zealot to preach this to everybody. And it was a very humbling lesson. And I'm grateful that I learned it at 19, that, you should never tell anybody what to do in their life. But I'm glad I learned that then instead of at this age of 50, 51 now. But so the information that you were learning back then, was any of it relevant?
When I was in school, relevant to where I am now? Well, you come out of school knowing the word oxalate, and you know that anyone with a kidney disease, any kind of renal diseases, kidney stones particularly, needs to be careful about the oxalates in their diet, because the main ingredient in a kidney stone is oxalate, which is this natural chemical that's in spinach and sweet potatoes and Swiss chard and a few other plant foods. So I knew about that. And so when a family member had severe kidney problems and it was causing him so much pain he didn't want to live, and I suggested to the family that they look into oxalates, they would say, well, it's too late for that. Like, this is way more serious than diet. Like, it's like, wait a minute. Diet isn't why it's there. And if you ignore the diet piece, you'll never have hope of doing anything but the kind of stuff we do in medicine now, which is no longer about healthcare. It's about disease management and using different interventions, mainly devices, surgeries, and drugs to try to adjust to a disease condition, not really reverse it. Yeah. So in school, at the time when I was at Cornell, the one of the leading professors was vegetarian, pretty much vegan, anti-dairy. And it was an era when the dietetics world was now accepting vegetarianism as an acceptable diet. It never had been. We understood meat was an important part of easy way to get bioavailable minerals and vitamins and necessary protein and necessary fats. We knew that until I was in school in the mid 80s. And then it was becoming very fashionable to be vegetarian. And it was with a principal professor there that I was influenced by. So that encouraged me to go in this Frances Moore Lopez direction. She was kind of came before the Diamonds did. And then later 10 years later, the diamonds and many others undergirded this, and veganism became a bigger thing. And I went that whole path, like many of us who are health conscious did. And now that I'm 61 almost, I kind of wish that today's people who are at that age that I was in our late teens and early 20s, who are picking up the same message that we had back in the early and mid 80s, it didn't work for us. So how is it going to work all over again 30, 40 years later? It won't. But unfortunately, we're not necessarily in a position to say, hey, don't make my mistakes. Find your own mistake to make.
Yeah.
And then, in school is not a place to really, truly get all the facts straight. It's a place to learn how to think, hopefully.
So let's go down the rabbit hole. I have, as you may or may not know, for 15 years, I released a lot of cookbooks on paleo, keto, ancestral diets. And obviously there was a large portion of the recipes that I would have shared, which would have had oxalates in them. We're looking for gluten-free substitutes. So we've got the nut flours, if you want to call them that. We have sweet potatoes in a lot of the recipes because people are still wanting to choose smart carbs or healthy carbs as opposed to these ones, So I know this is going to trigger a lot of people in the good ways or the not so good ways, and I'm okay with that. I'm good with that. That's my whole life, learning new information, and so I want to understand about these foods, about what oxalates actually are, why some people, and this is just my observation, and correct me if I'm wrong, why some people should probably never have them in their diet ever again, possibly, or maybe, or are there some people that can eat a paleo ancestral ketogenic diet that has these foods in it, but there might be some red flags for us to identify to either lessen, eliminate, or just understand what these natural foods that are often touted as really, really healthy for us, why there might be a big question mark over some of these.
There's a lot in all of that. Yeah, if we love the ancestral point of view, because if we can look back in time over millennia and millennia before human beings started completely inventing their world so much that we invented, agriculture and bread and peanut butter and chocolate bars and cabbage and all the things we invented, carrots, peanut butter, it all seems fine because we're such a creative species. We just are constantly innovating. And the more we innovate, the more we create side effects, but we're so interested and excited about our benefits that come out of our innovations that we will not hear about the downsides. So, Cal Newport talks about benefits only mindset. And when it's our own creation, we like the benefits. And so we're not looking at this other side. So the ancestral lens gives us a quick logic test on things. Like if it's ultra neo, then it doesn't deserve your trust all the way. You need to be willing to look at the downsides of the neo-ness of things and know that human beings have been pulling down woolly mammoth and buffalo and so on, and various creatures that are animal creatures as food for the beginning of time. And so it makes sense that ancestral lens helps us do that. And how much carbs we can eat and so on is going to be a lot of variable answers on that. But the general message here is like, yeah, some of these really trusted foods like sweet potatoes, chocolate, nuts deserve that big question mark that you're talking about. And it just is a tool of self-preservation. Literally, you can damage yourself on natural chemicals. Poisonous mushrooms are poisonous. Poisonous berries are poisonous. Lead, cadmium, mercury, these came out of the planet Earth. They're for trouble. And plants naturally are toxic. That's how they survive. I mean, a lot of animals will go way around certain plants, and the cattle will select certain plants in a field and leave others behind because they're looking for not the least toxic foods, but we have a Disney World brain. We think like nature's all kind and fuzzy and warm and just wants to give itself to us, especially the plants. They're just here for us. We love that.
Yeah.
Okay, kids, time to grow up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, some swaps. Like, okay, if we're going to start relying on sweet potatoes and nuts, you need to think about if you're really thriving on that or not. If you're not, that could be those foods doing it to you. That's a radical thought. The healthy food could make me feel less healthy. Combining the uncombinable, the water and oil of healthy food not feeling good, healthy food not fat. They don't mix. Like, you can shake it all you want, but you can't get them to mix in your head. This is the time. This is the time to shake up the dressing.
Yeah. Well, that takes me back to my 4-year experiment of vegetarian and veganism. Felt great for the first year, then after the second, third, fourth year, and I was already a pretty lean fella, but I became very, very lean, very, very weak, and very lethargic and pale, and the list goes on. And I had to go, but I'm doing it right. You know? It can't be with the food that I've just changed, because I felt so good for a while, and I told everybody, but maybe I need to eat a piece of meat again. Sorry to interrupt, but
no, but that's a point of genius to be able to reflect on. Okay, I can barely drag my carcass across the finish line of my own day, and it isn't your messed up genetics or your bad luck. It could be the way you live, and acknowledging that it's something you're doing is simultaneously powerful because you have total control over it. You can do something about it, but it's also a hard one to take when you've invested so much emotional energy in an idea. And we become ideologic about food so easily. Our food religion literally is like a religion, and it gets in the way.
It sure is. So let's take a deep dive into oxalates then, because I had heard murmurings of this over the last decade. People would say, well, can you release a low oxalate book or a no oxalate book? And I was like, well, it was in the peripheral, but I never I just being blatantly honest here, I never took the deep dive because it just felt so foreign to me, and there wasn't the pull, and there is the pull right now to learn more about this. And I think when I started Paleo Ancestral, that was 15 years ago, through my wife had read the book Primal Body, Primal Mind by Norton and went on that journey wholeheartedly. And it's fascinating because over the last year or two, we've really still follow those paleo guidelines, ketogenic guidelines, but where we're at now, I would say we're 95% carnivore these days with very little plant material in our diet. And that seems to be working for me in such a beautiful way, and I wonder whether it is the elimination of some of these oxalate foods that has been beneficial for me at this point in my life, and perhaps it would have been beneficial for me back when I started paleo as well. So oxalates, take me down this adventure of what they are, and where they're found, and what happens in our bodies when we consume these.
Yeah, what happens in our bodies is ours. It's so interesting, and it can be a little technical, but where it's coming from is trusted foods in the produce department, principally in the nuts, and the bran, and this and that. And the oxalate is a chemical that starts off as oxalic acid, which is a tiny little 2-carbon molecule with 4 oxygens on it. And it has a charge and can have a double charge, a negative charge, and it connects with positively charged ions. So that makes it a polar molecule that dissolves in water. And when it's connecting with positively charged ions, it's connecting with metals. A soluble oxalate is potassium oxalate, sodium oxalate. Insoluble means it can't come apart. So ions break apart. You put salt in water, it disappears because it breaks apart, and now it's dissolved. So some can dissolve and some can't. So when it's oxalate and it's calcium, you've got the material that's a kidney stone. And this is where it goes to in nature. Plants make calcium oxalate crystals for self-protection, for storing oxalate. There's a lot of reasons they need it. The plants use oxalic acid and can turn it into peroxide to fight molds. Crystals of calcium oxalate can be grown into pretty big pieces that can do all kinds of things, like in a tree bark, think cinnamon. You got these plates of armor made of quartz called calcium oxalate that makes it very hard for a beetle to get into the bark. You can see how protective that is. And you can make a little tiny shell of little crystals when you're a raspberry seed and put a little ring of them around the outside, giving you hardness, durability, and it promotes that kind of dormancy that a seed needs to have so it can last for years until the time is right to become a plant. And so the plants are doing all kinds of cool things, including building specific shapes of these crystals for particular purposes, can build these double-pointed needles that look like little toothpicks with sharp ends on them. Many of them in little bundles. They're literally arrows. They're intended to be arrows that can penetrate mucosal cells 1 or 2 deep. So if you eat these little crystals in kiwi, you can aggravate and agitate and damage the mucosal lining of your mouth, your throat, and the digestive tract. So you're eating oxalic acid itself, as well as calcium oxalate crystals when you eat foods like kiwi, sweet potato, Swiss chard spinach, various nuts and grains, buckwheat, teff, a lot of these non-gluten grains or pseudo grains like buckwheat or soba noodles, quinoa, teff, they're very high in oxalate. Kamut is a kind of like historical wheat. And then the bran and wheat and grain is high. And then there's like turmeric. It's really high in oxalate. If you use a lot of it, or now it's so popular as an anti-inflammatory. Whole root turmeric is high in oxalate.
And you mentioned chocolate too.
Chocolate, yeah.
Shut your ears, everybody. Or open your ears.
This is not an allergy, right? So we're poisoning ourselves with an acid that grabs calcium. So the acid, oxalic acid, gets into your bloodstream, the crystals just stay in your digestive tract and just cause inflammation, and you poop them out. But the acid gets into your bloodstream and starts mucking around with your white cells, your red cells, your vascular walls, your capillary beds, the little vessels that feed your tissues. It goes straight to the liver, uses up glutathione in the liver. And so the liver is stressing out because the liver cannot take it apart. It doesn't have any enzymes to break it down. It does not detox oxalate. The liver makes oxalates. So you eat it in, say, your kiwi spinach smoothie. It gets in your blood. It starts getting in there pretty quick within 20 minutes. And over the course of the next 8 hours, you've got oxalate in the bloodstream, and it peaks at about 3 to 4 hours after the meal. And that's all going straight to the liver. The liver's like, okay, folks, glutathione, because this is a pro-oxidant. It's messing with the cells. It goes straight from the liver up to the heart. Goes into one side of the heart, goes to the lungs for air, and back to the heart. So in the meantime, you haven't done anything about the oxalic acid that you've ingested. You're just spreading it around. It's living with your red cells, and your white cells is starting to distress them within 40 minutes of the smoothie. Your white cells are no longer working as well as they should. They're getting inflamed, and they're putting out pro-inflammatory cytokines. The whole system's like going inflamed. You don't feel any of this. There's no symptoms of this, but in the background, there's some stress going on. And eventually that circulation brings that blood to the kidneys, and the kidneys filter it out of the blood and excrete a lot of it, most of it, but not all of it. And that's what's been missing in the science, that nobody's recognized, that you don't get it all out, and that in the meantime, between lips and kidneys, there's a whole pathway of exposure. So you're in this period of time after these meals with higher levels of oxalate in your bloodstream than is okay. It's not okay level that happens when you eat a super high oxalate food or meal, which high oxalate day is defined as 250 milligrams a day. An extremely high oxalate diet is defined as 600 milligrams a day. And your standard spinach smoothie has, guess how much? How much if a high oxalate day is 600, how much is in one smoothie? About 1,000, somewhere upwards of 700. So a lot of people have been using this as a breakfast food for the last 10 years, right? One meal could be 4 times what a high oxalate diet is. So that's too much. And that's the message. For self-preservation, you should bring down a consumption of a poison to a level your body can handle. But you don't need 0, because it's not an allergy, at least not yet. It's not an allergy, it's a toxicity. So it doesn't have to be 0 chocolate. It doesn't have to be 0 tea. It doesn't have to be 0 anything. You just have to get the numbers down. So what you're consuming is something you can handle.
Yep. So, because we've seen the explosion over the last decade or more of green powders from influencers, wellness people, companies, this, that, and the other. You must be having get your essential greens every day, because studies have shown that people don't want to eat it. So we'll freeze dry it, or we'll put it in this beautiful container for you that's heavily marketed. We put a couple of scoops of that. So you've got your spinach, your kale, your broccoli. It's got some nut powders in there and pea proteins, and away you go. And then throw in a kiwi fruit, maybe throw in some chocolate to make it taste better, and you will have a beautiful meal replacement for you. And you're getting all of these benefits from the Garden of Eden, as some would call it. And off you go. You're healthy. And then
Off you go.
then you can eat shit for the rest of the day too, because you've ticked that box.
And we've always used vegetables so we can have ice cream, right? Eat your whatever so you can have dessert. And we still do that in adulthood.
So what I'm gaining here is there's nothing inherently wrong with these foods in smaller doses, but we probably shouldn't look at them as health foods for us through that lens anymore. Is that correct? Because everything's about dosage, and what you're saying is we're eating these foods in such a higher dosage than we probably ever would in our ancestral days. Possibly. Absolutely. So
in our ancestral days, we had winter where these foods were scarce. You couldn't do raspberries in your smoothie every day in ancestral days. You were hiking, traveling and seeing raspberries for 2 weeks and grabbing a handful here and there, and maybe grabbing enough to dry for some pemmican or something. But generally, they living on it.
We have wild raspberries growing on our property, and they come out once a year, I believe it is. And you would be hard pressed to, over a course of a week, to find more than half a handful. Like when you see one, it's like, oh, there's one, and one might be a little rotten, one might be underripe, and there's that perfect one. It's like, oh, one. And you get excited over eating one beautiful ripe wild raspberry. You get excited about that. It's not like you putting a cup of them into a smoothie every day.
But now you can buy the frozen bags, a 5-pound bag at your wholesale retailer, and you got, it's just not, you don't think that's natural, but what you're describing is what's natural. There's a certain scarcity of carbohydrates in the environment, including raspberries.
Yeah. My wife and I are blessed. We live on 200 acres of wild rainforest, and you walk through there and there's the occasional native lemon that, again, you might get 5 or 6 lemons over the course of a while, or some passion fruits, and you're getting a few, and the rest is just very difficult to find food. I'm sure if there were some indigenous people that went on the walk with us, they'd identify different types of foods, but it is not like going to the supermarket, that's for sure. Even on 200 acres, there's very little sustenance out there, except if you start hunting the wildlife, and even that is quite scarce. But I'm fascinated about the science, the anecdotal stories that you've discovered, and really the symptoms. And what are the warning signs for people that may have a massive toxic overload of these foods in their body, that are the red flags? Like, is it joint pain? Is it depression? Is it anxiety? Can it be defined as certain imbalances or illnesses or diseases? Sorry, my questions are always 4 or 5 questions in one. So.
Yes, and I'm not writing them down, so I lose track. But I think you've essentially done a nice job of introducing this idea that you can watch for problems and need to connect it to your diet. And with oxalate poisoning, like any other disease, it starts off completely silently. Like I said, after that's finished smoothie, you feel fine because you have belief that what you just did was fantastic. And, there's a lot of biology in belief. There's whole books on the biology of belief. So you can really rev up your metabolism just in your, we call this placebo effect, in your strong devotion to the ritual of your smoothie. So you're going to feel great. Maybe for a couple of years, you might even get away with feeling great. But eventually, the silence will start to break. It might be kind of late, The end stage sign is a kidney stone. If you've already got urinary tract problems, if you got nighttime urination, frequent urination, a bladder that can't hold its urine, if you've got burning urine, cloudy urine, interstitial cystitis with bladder pain, you are probably poisoned with oxalate. The other systems that show up are, like you said, the joint pain. So the whole musculoskeletal system can get rheumatic in nature. So you start to get achy and swelly, and you lose the strength in your hands and start to have, pain. It can become fibromyalgia type pain with a lot of muscle stuff. You can get stiffness, lose your range of motion. That can all be oxalates causing inflammation. The crystals start forming in joint spaces and you end up with gout-like symptoms. I was told I had gout in college. It was the oxalates because I was a no drinking, goody two shoes vegetarian in college with gout. Gout is supposed to be for the big bad boys who are drinking and eating too much meat. But that isn't necessarily the case because there's 5 types of crystals that cause crystalline joint pains, and oxalate is one of them. So another system would be your nervous system. Like you said, anxiety, depression, overwhelm, trouble thinking, brain fog, sleep problems, waking up too early, having trouble staying asleep, restless legs, mood, all kinds of like lost motivation, or just like what I call flat affect. I mean, somebody's having a birthday. Great, fine, whatever. You just don't seem to get excited about things. Having trouble staying focused, having trouble learning. You see this in the children having learning problems, trouble with spelling and memory and recall, and even connecting the right idea to what you're trying to express yourself. So there's a lot of neurological things that can be pain syndromes as well. When nerves aren't working well, you can get muscle spasms because the muscles are innervated. Nerves tell the muscles what to do. You can get things like hiccups. You can get peristalsis problems with your digestive tract. They can cause belching and bloating and gas. I had that combination every night after I was eating sweet potatoes as my starch. It was taking place of bread, and I was having it often for breakfast, a little bit maybe with lunch, often with dinner. And so I was eating it every day as my starch and having Swiss chard for dinner at least once a week. And every night at bedtime, when I lay down and I have attacks of hiccups, which is a neuro poisoning sign. Your nerves are firing like crazy, overstimulated nerves, and causing muscle spasms. So it can be twitches, weakness. So neurological issues, which includes the mood, pain syndromes, urinary tract syndromes. You can get skin problems, rashes, and even dandruff and all kinds of things. Carpal tunnel, the things where you've old injuries that don't recover well, fatigue can be a big one. It's very different in each person. You could be slowly eroding your bones and suddenly in midlife you have osteoporosis for no good reason. You exercise, you eat well, but you've been sucking the calcium out of your system, making your system super acid, and been using your bones to keep your pH right and to keep the calcium levels even in your bloodstream.
Anecdotal stories. Are you comfortable, apart from yourself, you've shared yours, but yeah, what's the legalities around this that
Well, we have you on my YouTube channel. There's a 13 slightly long form 10-minute stories, and there's 20 something shorts, which include clips from people talking about the health problems they've had. And it's very interesting, me working directly with clients in the various ways this shows up. In the medical literature, we call it heterogeneity, or it's very different in its expression clinically. There's a genetic form of this disease that used to be completely deadly for very, very, very small part of the population, where sometimes the only symptom they had was neck pain. So if you just have cranky neck and you can't turn your head when you're driving, or just like something bothering you with your skeletal system, or even eyes, we see a lot of stories with eyes. I'm convinced the reason I needed glasses in 10th grade was from oxalate, because I was the kid who ate all our vegetables, and the other 4 children didn't need glasses because they weren't the veggie eaters. And then, in college, I needed bifocal. So I've been in bifocal since I was 20. And since I've been on a low oxalate diet, my eyes have stopped getting worse and I no longer have astigmatism. But at this age, going on a diet at almost 50 years old did not undo eye damage that goes back from childhood. But other people coming to me have had their cataracts go away. They've had children who no longer need glasses. I've had people who no longer need glasses to drive. All kinds of severe problems with anxiety. Anxiety can clear up by getting rid of these foods. Water on the brain. Somebody's so bad that she wanted to commit suicide, and now she's living with still a long way back. But the suffering that I see with my clients is pretty frightening. And a lot of people won't get to that kind of extreme. But underlying that are all these processes that can take it that far. You take it only a third of the way to that far, and you still might have weaker bones, more prone to injury, earlier aging, a bigger propensity to dementia, because it's clear in the literature that the damage in the brain is related to the Parkinson's and all the forms of dementia. There's a lot of things you don't want to have. And it seems to me that the literature is very clearly explaining that a high oxalate diet can expose you to enough oxalate where you have premature aging. So even if you're not suffering with bad vision and anxiety and urinary tract problems and digestive problems, that's another area, by the way, I failed to mention. Just your vitality level and your life health span could be at risk by trusting these foods as if they're super healthy. We just need to take high oxalate foods off the health list and make a couple little swaps and get back in the kitchens.
Well, it's so fascinating. I said I'd mentioned the story, and I saw a dear friend recently, a chiropractor, for an issue I was having, and they use a tool called neuroemotional technique or neuroemotional therapy, NET. And I went in there for a whiplash from a surfing accident that I had in August. I love to surf, and as soon as it happened, it was painful. I was like, oh, well, there's something for me to discover here. That's how my belief system always works. Like, I'm going to meet somebody that will unlock another path for me to explore from this injury. So whenever I hurt myself doing something, I'm always like, thank you. Thank you for the pain. I trust that whatever this is, because I know it's just not from surfing, it'll lead me into a new discovery, which is why we're having this conversation today. So thank you, Nick. Thank you, surfing. And I visited this chiropractor, and we're having a discussion, and it came up that I have recurring nightmares, and I have sat with different plant medicines, psychedelics, animal medicines, such as 5-MeO-DMT from the bufo, various toad. I have seen many, many different people in the health space, the healing space, what you would call woo-woo or out there, and traditional as well. Because in my day-to-day waking life, I don't believe that I have fears, stresses, anything major going on in my life. Like, my waking life is fantastic. But then I'd go to sleep every night time, and I'd have these recurring, strange nightmares that are very disruptive. As I said, sat with different things, gone in to face whatever unconscious or subconscious fears I may be holding on to. And through this technique with this woman, she said it's not emotional, because she tested through her technique, and it came up as oxalates. I was like, what the fuck? Oxalates? She's like, yeah, that's what your body is showing up, which is causing your recurring nightmares. And that sort of floored me, because I felt like there must be some hidden trauma or emotion that's causing this in my unconscious state. She's like, that there's nothing to do with emotions that she could find. She goes, there's high oxalates in your body. I'm like, I said, what are oxalates? And she goes, well, they're found from, you should check out Sally's work. Sweet potato, chocolate, almonds or nuts and berries. I'm like, well, that's what I eat. That's what I crave. Apart from my meat-based and seafood-based diet, that's what I love to have. He's like, well, you might want to go on this discovery of what oxalates are, and here we are. and it's fascinating, because since I've lowered my oxalates, I have had neck pain for the last 35 years. Constant chiropractic, different body works. And they seem to be they seem to offer relief, short-term relief for me. But over the last month, my neck pain seems to be dissipating quite rapidly, to the point where I was in the car with my wife the other day. I'm like, my neck doesn't seem to be troubling me before. I'm still having the occasional nightmares because I still have, I binged on some chocolate here and there recently, and some avocados and some sweet potatoes. And I have to be diligent with this, because I do believe that this holds something for me. And I'm at that point now where when I had a week or two with no nightmares, and then they started coming back, and it's because I reckon that I put those foods back in.
Here's a great case study to talk about. Like, there's so much in that. I have had many people who had been tortured with nightmares. The low oxalate diet fixes that. You're not unique in that. Neck pain, classic sign of oxalate problems, but nobody knows it. So your chiropractor's like, hey, what are you eating? But now, what's been happening for the last 30, 45 years, or maybe 51 years, because your mom's diet could have been high in oxalate. You could have been born with some oxalate. You could have been getting oxalate from her breast milk if she was eating a high oxalate diet. You could have been weaned into beets, sweet potatoes, white potatoes, peanuts, chocolate. Those are childhood foods here in the U.S. I mean, tater tots at school and French fries everywhere and potato chips on the weekend and potatoes in the Sunday meal. Like, it's everywhere. And so you could be having a bit of residual accumulation occurring from your entire life, because unlike living out in your 200 acres outside, you've been living from your refrigerator. And so you've been getting regular meals, and you've been getting oxalates in the form of potatoes, chocolate, nuts since you were a kid. And so at this stage, you have a load of oxalate in your thyroid gland, in your brain, in your eyes, in your bone marrow, your kidneys, and elsewhere. Your neck and spine. I destroy my neck and spine on eating healthy. So you have oxalate overload already in your body. So no, even stopping eating those foods completely, you still have it on board. And your body never wanted to be holding on to it. So now you're giving an opportunity to reverse that accumulation in the tissues. But that's mobilizing oxalic acid and oxalate crystals, which is really dangerous work for immune cells. It takes inflammation to do it. You're spewing a poison potentially back into your bloodstream, and you're creating a high oxalate situation from the previous food you once ate. And that process might take a decade.
Are there ways to speed up the process, or is that, again, trying to
tell the body what to do? Why don't we just tell the body what to do? So, have you ever heard of this idea about toxicity and dosing, where dose makes the poison? Have you heard that phrase? Dose makes the poison. So the faster you mobilize the oxalate that's hanging around in your thyroid gland and your shoulder joints and your neck joints and so on, in your bone marrow, the more oxalate on the move, the more toxic it is. So the faster you go, the more toxic it is, and the more likely you are to damage your immune system and make it kind of crazy. The more likely it is that you're going to cause side effects that are harsh. And you could blow out your kidneys. You could literally create a kidney stone by trying to unload the other oxalates that aren't in your kidneys into your kidneys, who have to take it out. Not good. So it is possible even to cause a disruption in your electrolytes as you're pouring oxalic acid back into the bloodstream. So you have wobbling levels of calcium and other electrolytes in the bloodstream. Now the pacemaker isn't working correctly, and the muscles of the vascular system are starving for potassium, and they're losing control over calcium. So you get this hypertension, you get a high pulse rate, you swear you're having a heart attack, and you go to the hospital with an electrolyte crash thinking you're having a heart attack or a stroke. And you literally could have stroke-like symptoms if you mess up your electrolytes that badly by over mobilizing oxalate deposits in the body. So the best way out of this mess is slowly and quietly. That's why we don't need to go down to zero oxalate, because if you eat a little bit of oxalate, or eat enough, like medically signaling enough that tells the body, hey, you can't keep mobilizing that stuff because here I am, I'm deleting it. So you're putting a little in the bloodstream from the diet. It tells the body, it helps the body moderate it. So oftentimes when I'm working with people truly sick with this, I'm asking them to eat a certain amount of sweet potatoes, beet juice, tea, white potatoes, some of these high oxide foods, in order to modulate and reduce the toxicity of the deaccumulation from your tissues.
I know, common sense.
It's common sense, but it's kind of complicated. It's confusing.
Yeah, yeah. I've often said, when I started working with in the paleo realm, ketogenic or ancestral realm, people would be looking for a quick fix to release weight, and I'd often say, how many decades did it take for you to accumulate that of which you are now? Why don't you give yourself the same amount of time to unwind that instead of wanting to get rid of it within a 4-week program or a 10-week program? That this is a lifelong journey. And so I echo your sentiments exactly. Tell me about
All very humbling.
All very humbling.
Hopefully a lot of us need humblings.
And it's so interesting that we're having this conversation, because I've learned to foil surf over the last year, and the common thing that I say, because everyone's always fascinated about this new type of surfboard that I'm carrying, I have great conversations with strangers in the car park at the beach, and the first thing I say is, it's the most humbling thing I've ever done in my life, because it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life so far, as far as a physical activity and a mental activity, learning this new sport at this age. But I said, it is so humbling that's why I love it, that I have to be okay and go through this journey of being a beginner, of understanding that I have so much to learn in this particular sport, that I can't rush it, and this is what we're talking about, trying to rush something, because I think that's the frustration that a lot of people fall into, including myself. I'm just assuming here is quick fixes to become good at something very quickly, or to get rid of something very quickly, instead of taking the time to understand something, understand our bodies, understand our beliefs, understand our spiritual journey, our health journey, our life journey. And, there's no rush. It's been a very important lesson for me to learn. I'm still learning.
This is a brilliant point. This is fantastic, because as grown-ups, we think we're past beginner, and that's ruining life itself, because we're really not receptive to deeper learning and going back to the hard work of learning and the patience that it takes to learn, and to own that being in a beginner space is to be in the space of possibilities, and being in the difficult struggle space is the space of finding out what you're made of and finding value and worth in your life, because everything that you worked hardest for are the things you most value.
Beautifully said. Sally, thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this podcast, and I'm sort of grateful that it's taken 500 interviews to get to this point. And thank you for my surfing injury, and thank you for the chiropractor, and thank you for everything. I love you, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers have loved this conversation. Until we meet again, thank you so much.
Until we meet again, it's been a joy and a privilege. Thank you.